Welcome to the second day of the Business Forum. We ask you to take a seat, please. We're going to continue with the second day of the Business Forum. I'm going to ask kindly again if you could please take a seat. We have an extraordinary agenda, so we ask again if you could take a seat to continue with the second day of the Business Forum. Welcome to the second day of the Business Forum of the 2026 IDB Group annual meetings. The theme of this forum is Harnessing Opportunities, Unlocking Growth. To begin, it is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, James Scriven, CEO of IDB Invest. Please join me in giving him a warm welcome.
Hi everybody. A lot of people from IDB Invest over here applauding. Estos son los hinchas.
Those are the fans.
Welcome. As I said yesterday, and Ilan referred to yesterday, we have to an extent an important announcement to make that has to do a lot with the capital increase, and this presentation will walk us through that. So I do believe that at this point in time, we're in a critical stage where the public and private are working together to be able to solve the development challenges. So let me start with a few ideas. One, we usually look at the region as a region of challenges. I want you to all use this stage and this conversation to talk about the region of opportunities. Why is that? We house and we have enormous potential to be able to solve the development challenges in the world. We also have the opportunity with a vibrant private sector that brings together its knowledge and expertise to be able to solve these challenges. And we do believe that we're at a stage of economic growth that can bring this all together. So let me share some of the important aspects about this. One, the global opportunity that we're facing. One, the region has and plays an enormous critical role in solving the development challenges. The natural resources that we have are tremendous. If you look at air, the Amazon, if you look at the natural resources, agribusiness, if you talk a lot about natural resources, agribusiness, renewable energy. These are amazing assets that the region has, but also I have a very dynamic private sector that is leading this effort. So Latin America has today what the world needs. What we don't have, and the challenge that we're facing, is capital. Capital is here to bring and create the gaps that we're trying to address, and bring these two together are at the core of the presentation and the discussion we wanted to have. So these are the significant gaps that we're seeing, and we're trying to work together. So the challenge that we're seeing is a challenge where there are enormous business opportunities, but the capital is not here. We're not connecting the capital with these opportunities. And that's the heart of what we're going to discuss and the heart of this presentation and the discussion. We do see where we do require technical expertise to create bankable deals. We do require mitigating the risk that we're facing. We need to develop trust with the investors. As we know, Latin America is not an easy place to do investments. So we have to generate that trust, and we need to harness the long-term project throughout the cycle. So this is what we need. What we need over here is to connect development opportunities or business opportunities with capital. What does that mean for us? Bankable projects. This is important, and the entire discussion that we'll need to do is to try to create the environment where the asset that we're producing and creating can be financed. So let me talk a bit about us. So this is where the IDB Group comes into play. We usually use the word enter IDB Group. We have more than 65 years of working with governments. We know the regulatory frameworks. We know how to change those regulatory frameworks, but increasingly important, we know how to identify those opportunities way before the market sees them. So we've got early leads of all these opportunities. We also have within the group IDB Invest, which I represent. This IDB Invest knows the country opportunities, knows the investors, and we're trying to connect those supply and demands together through our interactions. So bringing together country needs, development challenges, opportunities with investors, that's our exact role. We've been practicing for many, many years. This is not new to us. For 10 years, we've been practicing. We have deployed what we call our originate-to-share model. What does that mean? Again, connecting development assets or opportunities to investors. We've invested and channeled $75 billion into the region over the last 10 years. We did it by mobilizing $32 billion from about 180 investors in the world, doing about 700 projects. So it's important that this connection is already happening, and we've been practicing for the last 10 years. What does this mean? I know that we usually talk about a development challenge about connecting assets, lives changed and all, but for all of you, these means tangible. Building 8 roads, 14 ports, 6 hospitals, 5 schools. These are the assets that we've been investing over the last 10 years, and we're expert in all these sectors. So again, early origination, upstream work, understanding what markets are facing and how these markets are developing these assets. On the other side, partnering with investors for those assets to be financed, but importantly, the development role of connecting these two by talking about what we call assuming smart risk. That is understanding it, having the tools, the expertise to be able to bring these two things together. Let's use Paraguay as an example. You've heard President Peña, you've heard the Minister Fernandez refer to that over the last year, 2 years, we've had significant impact in Paraguay. Let me double click on that. Let me tell you exactly what we've done. So we do believe that the strong macroeconomic stability that Paraguay is projecting and has is second to none today. There's a very strong commitment from private sector Paraguayan companies. Third, the investments are ready and waiting for this. So what does this mean for us? Over the last year, we invested $1.6 billion. We do plan to invest another $2 billion in the next 2 years. That is impact. That is 7% of the GDP of the country. That's an amazing impact. And we've been able to do it by projects like you're going to hear from Paracel. You're going to hear the CEO of Atome in the next panel talk about the project that we did together. Rutas, you're going to hear it across the board. You're going to see how we're able to connect these two projects with investors. So Paraguay is probably a clear example of why this can be done in practice. So let's zoom out a minute. You heard from Ilan yesterday referring to we're going to be deploying as a group $500 billion in the next 10 years. That means over $200 billion from IDB Invest. That is a consequence of the capital increase that we recently had and closed this past Tuesday, with 100% a commitment from our shareholders. That will get us to a level of investing about $22 billion a year over a period of 10 years. So this creates an opportunity that we did not have before, and we feel that we've been practicing for 10 years And now we're going out to the field. Estamos saliendo de la cancha a jugar el partido, if I may use those words. So let me conclude with a few remarks. What we're building over here is a platform that grows with every deal, that grows with every project, that grows with other investment platform. We're not alone in this. We need to partner. We need to partner with all of you. We need to partner with investors. If not, this will remain a boutique. This is not what we're after. What we're after is expanding a platform that can change the lives of billions of people in Latin America and the Caribbean. So again, the opportunities are there. We need to harness them and make them bankable. The investors are there. They're looking around the world to be able to connect these two, and we're creating that platform for that connection to happen. But the message I want to leave with all of you is we can't do it together. We need all of you to be able to do it. So with that, thank you for attention. I pass on to the next panel that will talk about details. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Scriven, for your remarks. We will now move to our next segment, critical minerals and energy, powering economic development. Let's begin. First, I would like to welcome our keynote speaker, Mr. Nigel Clark, Deputy Managing Director at the International Monetary Fund. Welcome, Mr. Clark. The floor is all yours.
Good morning. President of the IDB, Mr. Elan Goldfein, executive directors, members of management, staff, and others in attendance here this morning. It's wonderful to be with you in the great country of Paraguay. Today, we gather to discuss a very important topic, critical minerals and energy, powering economic development. Already, Latin America and the Caribbean region is in a position of strength. It has one of the cleanest electricity mixes in the world, with renewables accounting for approximately 69% of electricity generation. At the same time, the region remains a major energy producer with about 9.7 million barrels of oil per day of production in 2024 and a sizable hydrocarbon resource base. This region is also central to critical minerals. Chile, Peru, and Mexico account for over 37% of global copper mine production. Furthermore, the broadest lithium triangle, Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile, holds about a half of global lithium resources. These are strategic assets that that in this more fragmented global economy will create opportunities for Latin America and the Caribbean. The region can harness this opportunity, capture more value at home, and become a more reliable supplier in global supply chains. This can translate into faster productivity growth, better jobs, and stronger export earnings. But to fully reap the potential benefits, a strong foundation of resilience, investment, and trusted partnerships will be essential. Now, how do we do that? Let me just highlight 3 main points. First, we have to recognize and internalize that the global landscape has fundamentally changed. Over the last 2 decades, global production and supply chains have become more concentrated, and this raises concerns about choke points, where there's more reliance on less substitutable goods, and this meets higher risks of disruption. For example, across various critical mineral markets, the top 3 refining countries account for, on average, 86% of processing capacity. The events of this past decade, from pandemics to wars, have shown that supply chains are not just a business logistics issue, but supply chains can have a macroeconomic impact. We have been reminded of that again in recent weeks with the conflict raging in the Middle East, where when disruptions hit concentrated and hard to substitute sectors, especially energy and strategic inputs, the effects can quickly show up in inflation, in output, in investment, and in confidence. Geoeconomic fragmentation is also affecting trade and investment patterns in strategic sectors, including energy and critical mineral supply chains. Now, the opportunity for Latin America and the Caribbean is then twofold: to reduce vulnerabilities at home through building more resilient supply chains, and to become a trusted and reliable partner abroad, especially supply of processed materials, not just raw inputs. That brings me to the second point: strengthen value chain resilience through diversification and not through closed markets. IMF economic modeling suggests that targeted diversification can improve resilience while limiting efficiency losses, especially in sectors that are highly concentrated upstream and difficult to replace. A practical example of targeted diversification is Chile's response to the mid-2000s curtailment of pipeline gas imports from its then dominant supplier. Chile diversified that critical input by developing LNG import capacity at Quintoro, operating since 2009, and the Mijones since 2010, giving it access to global LNG markets and strengthening energy reliability. Closed markets, on the other hand, increase concentration risk. Integrated and competitive supply chains that are less vulnerable to shocks also builds the region's credibility as a reliable supplier. For Latin America and the Caribbean, deeper regional integration can be a powerful and practical tool for resilience. Lower trade costs and cross-border frictions can translate into a greater variety of suppliers for business, for higher trade and investment, and for better resource allocation. Closing gaps, therefore, in customs and transport infrastructure, reducing non-tariff barriers, and strengthening trade policy coordination within the region can also support regional value chains. For example, there's copper concentrate mined in one country, smelted and refined in another, and then turned into wire, tubing, or grid components in a third. Resilience also depends on integration with the rest of the world. With deep and comprehensive trade agreements, firms can operate with more predictability as well as more sourcing and production options. That is why the recent EU-Mercosur agreement is such a welcome development. It would bring together a market of 720 million people, covering nearly 21% of the entire global economy. And over time, it would help Mercosur exports to the European Union to grow by more than 17%, according to economic modeling by the European Commission, while also encouraging more diversified and higher valued exports. The third and final point, create an enabling policy environment for investment. Why? Because resilience requires investment, and investment requires good policies. Businesses can manage commercial and technology risks, but policy uncertainty can be a significant source of risk. Long-term investment requires confidence, low and stable inflation, sustainable public finances, predictable tax systems, transparent regulations, and strong, credible institutions. This is where the efforts of government and the private sector are complements and not substitutes. Governments create an environment for entrepreneurship, competition, and investment. And as the IDB knows well, the private sector brings capital, technology, execution, capacity, and market discipline. So to maximize long-term private investment across linked value chains, from energy supply and mining to processing and refining, to grids and infrastructure, and on to manufacturing, macroeconomic stability, predictable policy frameworks, and regulatory clarity are absolutely essential. So let me close with this. Latin America and the Caribbean have a unique opportunity to build more resilient supply chains and to become a trusted and reliable supplier to the rest of the world, both of processed material in addition to raw inputs. More resilient supply chains would mean fewer costly disruptions and more stable growth. Through sound policy and investment decisions, countries can move up the value chain, ensuring better jobs, higher standards of living, and long-term prosperity. Thank you, and good morning.
Thank you, Mr. Clark, for your remarks. We will now proceed with the panel discussion moderated by Katia Bowaza, Chief Regions Officer at IDB Invest. Welcome, Katia. She is joined by the following panelists: Tomás Serebrisky, Manager of Infrastructure and Energy Sector, IDB. James Spalding, President of Atome Paraguay SAE. And Martín Pérez de Solay, CEO of Glencore, Argentina. Ms. Bowaza, the floor is yours.
Gracias. Buenos días.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us. It's a pleasure to be here in Asunción. It's sunny and warm. We have a very important panel. We'll be doing this in English.
Thank you, Nigel and James, for your remarks, which help set the stage for our panel. Critical minerals and energy are two of the forces shaping the future of our region. When it comes to critical minerals, Latin America sits right at the center of the global supply conversation. The region holds, it's worth repeating because we need to remember these facts, more than 35% of the world copper reserves, half of the global lithium resources, and already accounting for 30% of the global mineral production. At the same time, the region is also on the front lines of the energy discussion, working to expand efficient and safe energy system. The demand is accelerating. Global lithium demand alone is set to go to between 7 to 12 times by 2050. So the opportunities is enormous. As James mentioned, this is a region of opportunities. The real question is, how can the region translate the resource-rich into investment and stronger value chains, real economic development? Because while Latin America produces these minerals in abundance, much of the processing, refining, and downstream manufacturing still happens elsewhere. So closing the gap will require partnerships, and this is where IDB Invest comes in. We're working together between the private sector and the governments to mobilize investment and scale up projects across the value chain. This is exactly the conversation we want to have today. So we have an excellent panel. I'm going to start with the first question to Martin.
Thank you.
Martin, we hear all the strategic importance, and of course you've seen it reflected in the Glencore production demand. How are you reshaping the way you think about growth, investment, and pretty much the future of your business?
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to this very nice country that is Paraguay, and be present in this world gathering for the IDB. I think you mentioned some numbers on which I would like to build up, because what we have seen in the world over the last 2 years and the need for critical minerals is quite important. Just to bring some numbers on the table and to address the main vector that we are seeing in energy consumption, that is electrification. We used to hear 5-10 years ago, the world is going electric. Well, the world went electric, okay? We're electric now. And electricity transmission becomes of the essence. If you look at the copper demand in particular, which is a place where Glencore is focused, the renewables that we speak about, in general, if you think of solar or wind, talking about 3 to 5 tons of copper per megawatt. And that number could be as large as 10 tons of copper per megawatt if you're thinking of offshore wind. If you think of a standard vehicle as compared to an electric vehicle will consume 5 times more copper than an electric vehicle. All of that has translated, and not to speak about the digital transformation, which is requiring more and more copper, and a tiny demand, which was less than 500,000 tons a year ago, it's going to be about 3 million tons by 2035. So that builds up to a total copper demand that everybody agrees will be around 35 million tons by 2035 from today's demand. There's a huge gap to be covered. What the world can produce, what the world needs, and that has translated into prices that had increased by 40% over the last 2 years. And that is where we, the private, start to play a role. The investment in developing new copper assets had been stopped and moved very slowly over the last 10 years. And all of a sudden, in the last 2 years, we're all focusing on developing these very important and interesting assets that we knew we had. For Glencore in particular, the focus is in Argentina. We have 2 very large projects in Argentina. One is the Aguarica project, the other one is the Pachón project. And when you couple what happened in the world demand and what happened in Argentina, we find a tremendous opportunity with all of the changes that the government is doing. The government put together the RIGI regime, which stabilizes tax, legal, and effects access throughout the life of the project and gives you a more reliable framework under which to invest. And also the reforms that the country is making to guide the country and the economy in the right direction is helping us move in there. So on the back of that, we submitted 2 RIGI applications, one for the Mara project for about $4 billion and one for Pachón for about $9.5 billion, which have been discussed and the approval process with the government. We not only submitted the RIGIs, we continue to move forward developing the projects, and we recently announced the restart of the Alumbrera project. Alumbrera has been a copper project that has produced copper in Argentina until 2018, which with low prices got to a point in which was no more economical to continue to operate it. At the current prices, Alumbrera became economical, and we are restarting Alumbrera. So if you think at what we are doing from a copper perspective, particularly in Argentina, is we are restarting Alumbrera, putting new copper units in the market from the restart as soon as 2028. Mara, Aguarica would come on the back of Alumbrera with the new growth production, and Pachón, that is a very larger project that requires more infrastructure, will come after that. So we are building this supply chain that would enable the world to have the copper that is required. But just like us, there are many other companies in Argentina doing the same. And just like Argentina, there are many other countries that are looking into its copper resources. Argentina is a bit of a star because Chile and Peru have been producing copper for the last 100 years. And Argentina is kind of the new kid in town that created the conditions and got the projects to be able to mobilize this production to the market.
So you mentioned your project for 4 billion. Can you give us a sense of the market in Argentina? Because as you said, it's a new player compared to Chile and Peru.
In total, RIGI applications for copper projects amount to half of the RIGI applications already filed. It's about $30 billion that have been filed between us, Los Azules, Jose Maria and Filo, and San Jorge in the process of, and others coming through. The number would be even larger. Copper in Argentina, we think of a country that if you add up the nominal capacity of the 7 lead projects within which you have Aguarica and Pachón as well, you add up to roughly 1.5 to 2 million tons of fine copper that the country could put together in 10 years. That has been slightly less than half of Chile today in 10 years, which puts a tremendous pressure on what needs to be done. It also puts a lot of investment into the country. Investment, if you add, RIGIs add up today to roughly 30, but could easily total investment in the sector up to roughly 60. And it's a huge amount of investment that would come into the country.
Okay, thank you for that. Tomas, these are very big numbers. So what are we doing at the IDB to make sure that the mineral security and making sure there's a stability in that market, hearing all the depth of the market and the size of the market?
Well, first, thank you so much for the invitation. Thanks, I guess. Thanks for
Takes a minute.
Yep, for the invitation. So maybe I'm wrong, but this is a unique momentum, historical momentum for mining in Latin America, unprecedented, right? And the opportunity to work not only on extraction, but move along the supply chain. And we are responding in the IDB, or the IDB Group, I guess very fast, setting up teams in both IDB and IDB Invest. And why we are doing it and why we are engaging, because we are convinced we can add value to the region. The challenges are significant. It won't be easy to move along the value chain. So we are organizing our work in 3 pillars. The first one is the policy level, the enabling environment, and here we have a lot to do going forward. First is work with countries in the development of mining policies, mining strategies. We are working with more than 5 countries right now in the development of those strategies. We are helping countries on the environmental and social licensing. We work with local communities in partnership with mining companies, with project-specific grants. Those are resources that are provided by mining companies to help us the social acceptance that we have to accept. That is not easy. There is a lot of resistance to mining in several countries. And then we are working on a more macro framework, and Nigel referred to this, on the fiscal frameworks. The wealth that is generated from mining has to somehow be shared, first with the government through taxation, royalties, and then be allocated properly, and sometimes through, for instance, the creation of sovereign wealth funds and other tools. And then we are also working at the policy levels on transparency standards, helping countries access transparency initiatives like EITI, which is well known. And then the second pillar is de-risking of investment, and that's what the IDB is doing, and is already very, very active. We still have, going forward, I guess the next stage will be how to finance junior projects. That's the challenge. That unfortunately the region doesn't have the financial tools yet to finance those projects that are very risky. This is different from more developed economies. For instance, Canada has specific instruments to finance junior projects that are specialized in exploration and are very, very risky. And then the third pillar is associated infrastructure. Mining in the region tends to be in very remote areas that needs logistics infrastructure, roads, ports, railways, and we are already financing, we have the pipeline of the public sector, some projects, roads, we are thinking on public-private partnerships for railways, so we're moving in that direction. That's very important. So just to summarize, I guess, working on these three pillars, and sorry, I forgot one that is absolutely key, that is skills, that we need significant skills to develop mining. So we see the IDB as a bridge, that plays the role of a bridge, of a region that is already an expert, knows how to do mining, and the consumers, we need to bring it together to move along the supply chain. And again, this won't be easy. We have to engage in discussions on how more advanced economies, if they want to diversify supply chains, they need to provide the resources, and that includes, take or pay, direct subsidies, all forms of de-risking going forward. But so we are very much, really, really motivated in working in the sector.
Happy to hear that. Let's bring a little bit of focus on the energy and green hydrogen. So for you, James, and congratulations on closing the deal with IDB. IDB Invest, we're very excited. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about it. So Latin America and the Caribbean want to become a hub for green hydrogen and new fuels, but there's a lot of challenges, competitiveness. From your point of view, what makes a green hydrogen project competitive today, and what needs to take place for these projects to be able to be scaled up and become bankable?
Thank you. Thank you, Katia, for this invitation to IDB Invest to be on this panel. The question is interesting because you mentioned want to become. So if somebody or someone wants to become something, it means you have to be proactive. You have to be involved, you have to be engaged, and you need certain things to happen. Green hydrogen value chain will not happen under business as usual, status quo, or así nomás ya da. We need strong allies, starting with a president that has the vision, the political will, and the strength to implement the structure to allow these projects to be competitive. We need public policies. We need strong partners in the loans and in the equity. We need strong off-takers. So it's a jigsaw puzzle that is not easy to put together. It doesn't happen by itself. It's not spontaneous. But when all the right pieces come together, it's a beautiful picture. And that's what happened last night, is that I was trying to figure out how I would be on this panel without having announced publicly that we closed the deal yesterday. But as, yeah. So as of 7 a.m. UK time, Atom PLC, which is our mother company in the UK, listed on the London Stock Exchange, announced that we signed $420 million with IDB Invest, EIB, FMO, and IFC. Of the four, IDB Invest is the largest, and also over the years, IDB Invest has played the lead role in putting all of this together on the side of lenders. So that has been announced, and we are now focused on closing equity of about $240 million that is being read now once again by 60 lawyers, looking at footnotes, but we're close, and we think that this is a very positive message to the world, as Atom will be the largest green fertilizer producer in the world in 2029. So this is not a minor announcement and goal, but as we've been saying quite a lot with our chairman, with Peter Levine and others, a finish line is also a starting line. So we all thought we would go on vacation today, but we have to work double now, right? So this just gets more and more necessary to move forward. But Paraguay also has a great advantage that we're 100% hydro. So I can guarantee that the electricity that's being used in this auditorium is from hydroelectricity, it's green. So that competitive advantage is tremendous for a project such as this. Because without hydro baseload energy, Itaipu has finished paying off its debt. So we have an amortized hydroelectric dam that can give even more competitive prices. Those are factors that need to happen. So when I sent our press release to the government and others, and one of the ministers answered, "Felicidades, Jimmy. Gracias por la perseverancia." Right, so as I knew that this panel would be in English, I did what all the young people do, which is go into AI and say, what is perseverancia in English, right? And what did I get? Perseverance, of course. But then AI, being an intelligent tool, said persistence, tenacity, and grit. And boy, did we need those four to get to where we are today. Garra. And I would add, as the human race still has something to teach AI, maybe, I would say that this happened because of faith, vision, and great partners. And one of them is here today, which is the CEO of Casale, a Swiss company. Federico Sardi is our EPC contractor that will be actually building the plant in Villeta in a free trade zone. And he will be delivering the plant as turnkey. We also have a fabulous partner, which is Yara International, which is the largest fertilizer and commodity trader in the world. And we have sold 100% of our production for 10 years. Amazing. So that's also key to help de-risk, as was being mentioned. So all of these factors have to come together, but I think Latin America and the Caribbean can be, no doubt, a hub. Okay. Even more, Katia, adding what we've seen in the past few weeks, the issue of food security. Mercosur is a supplier of grains to the world. And it's important that fertilizer prices can be held in check, can be stable, that we don't need to depend on over there, and that we can depend on our own resources and not on imported oil and or imported fertilizers. So I think all the pieces are coming together, and we'll keep you updated on how it's going.
Just the fact that you mentioned that you received a call from the minister shows a great partnership, what I was referring to, the government and private sector side.
I didn't mention the president, but he
and
also...
the president.
Yeah.
Well, he was here earlier, so...
Yeah, I sent him a photo.
Excellent. This is a great showcase. Thank you. So, Martin, coming back to you on the topic of energy, mining and processing critical minerals are increasingly energy intensive, and they're exposed to price volatility and supply disruptions. From your experience, what are the biggest risks to supply chain resilience?
Well, thank you. Listen, I think I have to answer your question first from an engineering point of view, and processing any commodity requires three things. You have to have the commodity, you have to crush it and heat it up. Crushing and heating up requires energy, so lots of energy would be required. But the most important one we're trying to address today here is how do we get the commodity? How do we increase the production? And I think you covered that in the first part of the discussion. The increase in the price of copper is evidence in this increase in the demand. There's some volatility, but it's a sustained increase over the last 2 years that is telling us the world needs these additional units, and this is helping the projects that were in advanced stages of development to start to move up and come into production. So similar to what we were just discussing, it requires a lot of perseverance here, because you're right, it's not the right word to build things. But when you put it more in technical terms, there are 4 things that enable you to get something done. I think that the first thing that has to happen is that it needs to be a clear opportunity. And the opportunity is out there. It is very clear. The market requires the copper, and the country in which which we are talking about, which is Argentina, has made all of the reforms to ensure that large investments could come to the country, and we can now think of 30 or 50-year horizons to invest in Argentina. The second point is the leadership. You need to have strong leadership, as you were just mentioning with Autumn Paraguay. It is of the essence to have that leadership. And in the region, we have had the largest mining companies operating for the last 30 or 50 years. In Argentina, since the last 3 years, all large mining companies are operating in the country. You've got BHP, you've got Lundin, you've got Rio, you've got Glencore, you've got McEwen, you've got everybody that has something to say in the mining world in country, providing the right leadership to be able to build these projects. The third point, and it is a very interesting one, is do you have the resources to develop the projects? And what we have seen is the international community is quite keen on financing projects that would add additional copper units into the market. But it's not just financial resources. There are a lot more resources that are required. We need to develop physical and social infrastructure. And it's not just physical. The amount of investment that would come into a country like Argentina over the next 7 to 10 years to build these projects is huge. The demand on the labor is going to be tremendous. The amount of engineers and technicians that we'll need is tremendous. The amount of support that we will need from the provincial authorities, all of the permitting process that requires a lot of work, and once the permitting is completed, then controlling that things evolve according to the permit so as to ensure that the projects are working as we all expected to, require a lot of investment and supporting the provinces. And we yet haven't touched roads or ports or railways, which, how can you think of if Argentina was to produce 1 to 1.5 to 2 million tons of copper, that's somewhere between 7 to 10 million tons of concentrate that has to be shipped from the Andes to the ports, actually railed from the Andes to the ports and then shipped to wherever the consumption points in the world are. And that is huge, the amount of investment that is required. And I think that an institution like IDB and IDB Invest could play a great role, because it's absolutely in the middle of everything. You support us with project finance structures, bringing ECAs together that help us get the financial resources, as the case that we just discussed. But we also have a tremendous ability to work on the public side. And I want to highlight IDB's commitment to education. We need to educate more engineers. The region needs more engineers. The region needs more technicians. The region needs a lot more skilled labor. The region needs to develop resources to be able to bring this talent together with the projects. And projects are not around the main cities. Mining projects tend to be, pretty far away from main cities. So it's not only sometimes people ask, why does it take that long to build a project in mining? And the usual explanation is, well, because we are building a city at 4,000 meters height, and we're building a huge factory at 4,000 meters height. And it's not just deploying $9 billion, in the outskirts of Asunción. It's deploying $9 billion, 1,500 kilometers away from Buenos Aires at 4,000 meters altitude, and getting accommodation for more than 10,000 people to build a project, and more than 2,000 to operate it. It is easy to deploy the capital. The challenge is where we are deploying it, how we are deploying, and that's why it takes that long. So I see institutions like IDB and IDB Invest playing a great role in bringing all these things together and enabling the industry to develop. If we are able to do that, then the most important thing to be able to process the commodities, which is having the commodities, could be significantly de-risked. The fourth point that is required for a project to happen, and you just mentioned those with your calls from the government, is the alignment of all of the stakeholders. And the stakeholders go from the equity shareholders of a company to the federal government, the provincial government, the communities, and the people that work for the project, and the people that live in those communities, and the people that live from the additional or the indirect jobs that the mining industry generates. So that alignment, I think it's coming together across Latin America, and we are uniquely positioned now to take advantage of the opportunity, because we're all seeing this huge opportunity. And we're all seeing that we have these resources that you mentioned, half of the world lithium reserves, 40% of the world copper reserves. We've got what the world needs. And that is helping us get the alignment that is required to be able to move the projects on, that, at the end of the day, will give the security of supply that the commodity processing network requires.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that, because at the end of the day, we do this for impact and to improve the lives, to improve the education, to improve the communities. So I appreciate you mentioning what we do for a living. Thanks for that. James, coming back to you, what are the main challenges preventing your projects from reaching financial close, and what can others learn from your experiences? Of course, we did reach financial close on this one, so we're very happy. But in general, what do you see the hurdles?
I'm not going to tell all the secrets, so everybody else has to suffer as we did. But I think, first of all, as I said, is you need like-minded and great partners. IDB Invest has been there since day one, and there's been a top-down clear instruction from the IDB Group president through James. With a name like that, he's a great person, of course. But we have a lot that we can learn together. This is a first-of-a-kind project. Right? This isn't a cookie-cutter project where you just take from somewhere else and you plant it in Villeta. So there's a lot of lessons learned. One of the big ones, as I said, is perseverancia. You have to, I would add another definition beyond grit and tenacity. You have to even be stubborn, right? You have to be basically stubborn. And you have to be willing to push back on certain issues that we see being in country, that it doesn't work from somebody's office 8,000 kilometers away. So that partnership has to be ida y vuelta, right? We have to learn together. And I would hope that the world focuses more on the need for this transition, for decarbonization, for the importance of food security once again, and really the funding, concessional funding, that will help bridge the gap while the projects and the industry becomes more mature will be there. So I would want to also mention the support that was obtained through IFC with the Green Climate Fund. $50 million is the largest concessional funding from the Green Climate Fund to Paraguay. So these are things that go marking milestones that put Paraguay on the map. The double investment grade, who now everybody's saying, oh, that was easy. It took over 20 years, right? But the non-believers that would say Paraguay would never be investment grade are now saying, oh, that's just a piece of paper. But we're seeing a waking up of interest in private investment into the country. So we have to put everything in place. This is a partnership for the long haul. We need also, as I mentioned, this stable electricity prices, a long-term power purchase agreement. But if you have to go to the banks, I would say the first things you need to de-risk is to show that you have somebody to sell your product to, and you have to show that you have somebody who's going to build it. Right? And you have the political support from the president down. And just this month of January, the president of Paraguay published a decree which relates to the Power to X. So there's a McKinsey study that was done by or requested by the Ministry of Industry and Trade that is called Paraguay 2X. What do we need to do to double Paraguay's GDP in 10 years? And that's a hoja de ruta, it's a roadmap, but it shows the determination of the government. And there the green hydrogen value chain is considered one of the pillars. And through this, the decree, we have more previsibilidad. It's more predictable from here to 10 years to 15 years, because it's important to have that security when you're investing $650 million into a country.
James, doesn't sound like you suffered too much.
Well, you can tell can you see my ojeras? My eye bags, right? My hand is still shaking from signing yesterday.
Yeah, but you have the president calling you, the minister calling you.
Peter was there to give me emotional support as I signed $420 million of debt. But
well, we look forward to the ceremony at 1 o'clock. We invite you all.
But they say, Katya, everything that's worthwhile has to be difficult, right? You have to. It's even sweeter now because we made it a pesar de todo.
Well, you don't have to tell that to Martin that lives in Argentina.
Yes.
So thank you. Tomas, coming back to you, let's talk a little bit about the roles that IDB and IDB Invest can play to align the national strategies with infrastructure, with private capital. What else can we be doing? What are we doing and what else can we be doing?
Yeah, and let me answer the question on an area that we're working together, that is cross-border infrastructure, and taking the case of electricity. And I refer to what the President Goldfein said in the previous event. There is an integration event, Mercosur and the European Union. And he said, we are the integration developing bank. And he mentioned our initiatives, South Connection, American El Centro, Amazon Forever, and One Caribbean. So I think probably the best example of how we are working as an MDB and together IDB Invest is transmission, is electricity. That has been, I would say, very difficult. to bring all the countries together. I have to use the word that my co-panelist mentioned, perseverancia. We are there, and we've been there for decades. An example, or probably the best one, is CIEPAC. In Central America, we spent more than 15 years trying to setting up this integration market, electricity market, but we made it. It's working. There is trade. We push it from the public sector, but most of it is private. It's operated by a private company. And then now we are working on, I would say, flagship integration projects. One is the integration between Panama and Colombia. This will be a privately financed infrastructure, but it's taking time. And then the other that is very interesting, because not all the countries are ready to, I guess, let the private sector build and operate transmission infrastructure. So we have the case of Ecuador and Peru that will finance from the public sector side the infrastructure in the Ecuadorian side, and then you hopefully that have the letter of intent to do it from the private sector, the transmission line in Peru. So this shows the example of how we are working together. But we are also working together on what's needed beyond physical infrastructure, and those are the rules, the market rules. We need for this integration to be really effective, to have well-functioning, well-designed market. So we are also working, we just agreed with CINEA, the Andean countries, to set up the wholesale market. That's a major achievement. So hopefully that will provide more dynamics to the electricity market. And there again, we are working together. But we are also working together in many other projects in this sector, and creating the space, the enabling environment to do much more and to bring private sector participation. A nice example again from Ecuador is a guarantee. There were many projects that couldn't advance with private sector investment, most of them solar energy, greenfield. So from the public sector, we provided I would say, a political risk guarantee. And then now it was signed and it's moving forward. Then we do other partnerships like co-financing, parallel financing for the state-owned company in Costa Rica, ICE. So that's another interesting case. So we have, again, many examples, and probably the last one that we are working that is a very important one and relevant for Martin mining is the expansion of transmission in Argentina. It's called the AMBA 1 line. It's over $1 billion project and will provide a guarantee, a public sector guarantee to take it to the market, that line, and allow, again, the private sector to re-enter the sector in Argentina. So those are examples that we are working. We also hope to be able to work in many other projects beyond electricity. We have many roads, toll roads, the hidrovia, which is very important for Paraguay and Argentina as well. So we have many examples, and I'm sure we'll have many more.
Very good. So if you had one wish for the next 10 years, what would that be in Latin America to see it flourish and get to where we need it to get to?
Well, as of today, Latin America is the #1 copper producer in the world, because Chile and Peru account for 30% of the production. From a mining perspective, it would only not keep in that leading position. It's incorporating other countries like Argentina to that production, and get, now that we're all seeing this opportunity, have the ability to develop it so that our people can benefit from that investment, that our countries are at the end of the day better off as a consequence of this investment happening in the country, this increased exporting capacity that our countries will have, and this additional development that the mining industry will bring to all of the industries around us.
Very good. James? Any wish for the next 10 years so you can get to all your targets and see
Repay the debt.
the region grow?
Yeah, I think more than a wish, because again, that's asking somebody else to do something that we need to do. I think it's putting our efforts as a country and as a region and as a global community in really moving ahead with this decarbonization program as a world economy. You know, there are many people who say climate change is a hoax. I don't know, but we see that there are opportunities to do something better, greener. So why not take advantage of that, still make good money, but have positive impact on the planet. And if I had one wish, I would wish I could play tennis better.
Fair enough. Tomas, any final?
Yeah, I guess is to seize the opportunity. Really, it's a unique momentum. The region can grow, can develop, reduce poverty. Really, this is a moment. Hopefully, there is a political commitment to let it happen.
I fully agree. All the stars are aligned. It's more than a commodity boom. It's actually structural shifts that have happened to make this line up the way it is. All eyes are on, well, maybe not right now, but all economic eyes are on the region. We are very active. We want to remain active. As you said, for every project you do, we need more roads, we need more schools, we need probably more ports as well. So count on us for that. And if anything, the takeaways from this panel, the overarching is perseverancia, for sure. But I picked up a lot of things that I'm going to have to start adding to my vocabulary: faith, vision, perseverance, partnership, tenacity. So thank you for that. Thank you for sharing your projects and your thoughts. And thank you for the trust that you've put in us.
Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you, Katia. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much to all our presenters, and thank you to all the panelists for their valuable insights. As we get ready for the next panel, we invite you to explore the different spaces prepared for you in the main hall of the CONMEBOL Convention Center. There, you will find a unique data wall on Latin America and the Caribbean, presenting key figures that illustrate the reality and the potential of our region. The Ministry of Economy and Finance Museum, featuring historical documents and collections highlighting key moments of Paraguay's history. Also, an immersive experience showcasing impact projects from across the region, combining sound and visuals that transport visitors into each initiative. Make sure you don't miss this amazing experience. We're getting ready to move to our next session. Almost there. Scaling capital for growth. Originate to share. Let's begin. Please welcome to the stage Patricia Peña, Associate Deputy Assistant Secretary, Global Affairs Canada. Welcome, Patricia. It's a pleasure to have you here. Agostina Pecci, Head of Global Capital Markets, Scotiabank. Juan Pablo Raffetto, Head of Latin America Infrastructure Debt, MetLife Investment Management. Lilian Coutinho, Managing Director and Head of Latin America and the Caribbean, SMBC Group. And our moderator, Fabio Fagundes, Chief Products Officer, IDB Invest. Welcome to all of you. Fabio, it's all yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for Paraguay for hosting us and for the hospitality and for all the people that we have met so far. Very exciting. So IDB Group Business Forum 2026. What we have seen so far is great attendance. Many of our investors are here in Asunción, and we have had very constructive discussions. So what I would like to start with is a brief introduction of what we will be discussing today. You have heard from James Scriven, our CEO, and now Katia in a great panel. Now we will be discussing what sits at the heart of the region's growth challenge. How do we scale capital quickly, responsibly, and with the size that Latin America and the Caribbean truly need? At IDB Invest, our role is very clear, and you have been hearing it through the days here. We exist to connect high-impact developmental projects with the right kind of capital. Capital that not only finances growth, but helps make businesses more productive, more sustainable, and more competitive across Latin America and the Caribbean. The scale of the challenge is well known. The annual financing gap for sustainable projects in the region is estimated at around $600 billion on an annual basis. While multilateral developed banks like ourselves, together, we commit only a fraction of that each year, this gap cannot be closed with public resources alone. Private capital mobilization is not optional, it's essential. That's why mobilization sits at the core of IDB Invest strategy. And you have heard many times, we call it originate to share. We blend our own financing with capital from more than 180 active mobilization partners, commercial banks from the region, from across the globe, insurance companies, and development institutions that work side by side with us in the financing those projects. With innovative solutions as the B-bond, we have issued securities in international debt capital markets, mobilizing additional 120 qualified institutional buyers to co-invest with IDB Invest in developmental projects in the region. We are truly connecting international capital markets to assets to be financed across Latin America and the Caribbean. You have heard James Scriven in his presentation are celebrating 10 years in 2026 with 32 billion of capital mobilized so far, and we are not done. You have heard about the impact, 1,500 kilometers of roads built, 9,000 megawatts of energy capacity installed, 20 million tons of cargo handled, ports, airports, rail infrastructure, 100 billion of international trade facilitated. And more importantly, we know that the region depends, again, the economy, the growth of the region is 90% based on millions of small and medium enterprises that we leverage in the capillarity of our anchor clients, large financial institutions and corporates in the real economy. We have been able to leverage their supply chains and finance those small and medium enterprises. Last year alone, IDB Invest had a record year. You have heard it many times, and I will emphasize what it means for us. $13 billion of commitments, but 7.7 billion came from investors across the globe. We are using their balance sheets to finance our projects in the region. How are we improving it? What we have been doing, and we know, as I said, we need to do much more. Firstly, our people. I'm very thankful to our teams in IDB Invest, giving back to society and serving our countries. Secondly, we work hand in hand with our clients and originate structured projects that are bankable with the adequate risk reward to attract private capital at scale. Finally, in addition to that, again, with the clients, 3 pillars here that I always talk about. Firstly, with the clients, structuring that project. Secondly, with the investors. So we are expanding and we are bridging and introducing our countries and projects in LAC to a much broader base of investors across the globe and expanding that. And those investors, they have the same long-term objectives aligned with the development outcomes that our region needs. And how we connect the two, the clients and the investors? We connect with instruments, with number of solutions that we are innovating and creating to connect it. I mentioned the B-bond before in the international capital markets, but we have also done repackaging, securitizations, and 1.6 billion of our own portfolio securitized via significant risk transfer to investors. We have done credit insurance policy, risk participation, and many other instruments that we are going to discuss today. For example, $1 billion fund with Allianz to attract investors that due to regulation, and again, I ask here from all of us, again, the EU, the European Commission has worked on this in the past, and we need to execute it. And the US is also talking about it. Many of those investors, they're limited by regulation to only invest in investment grade assets. And as you know, the majority of all the projects that we have in the region are sub-investment grade, and we are operating in the emerging markets. So what we have been able to do with this $1 billion fund is by using blended finance, that is another critical tool to unlock those markets while the regulation is adjusted, we are able to align the real perceived risk that sometimes is too high for commercial capital loan to come in. So blended finance allows us to use concessional resources strategically and selectively to pilot new technology, open new sectors, and prove business models that can later stand on their own. We are very thankful to Canada and other countries for their strong support in funding us in blended finance. We have seen this transformation firsthand. Just next to Paraguay and Uruguay, blended finance helped launch the country's first utility-scale solar projects 10 years ago when private capital was absent. A decade later, those same assets are financed entirely by institutional investors at better terms, clear evidence that catalytic capital can use well, can change and improve markets permanently. Similar stories can be told in renewable energy and decarbonization efforts across the region, including Chile. The principle, and I want to emphasize this when talking about blended finance, the principle is simple but really powerful in structured finance. Use concessional capital only where it's needed, only for as long as it's needed, and as always with an exit in mind so the private sector can come in. When markets mature, blended finance steps back and private capital steps forward. Today, and I'm honored to be joined by an exceptional group of panelists here that has been introduced by, to you, and together we are going to discuss what it takes to move from one-off transactions to repeatable platforms, from isolated deals to deep liquid markets, and from ambition to execution. With that, let's begin our conversation to accelerate growth to our region. Thank you and welcome to this panel. So I would like to invite Agustina to share with us, from a global bank and capital markets perspective, what are the signals that you see the investors when assessing opportunities in Latin America and the Caribbean? How can originate to share platforms, improve risk allocation, pricing, and deal readiness to help mobilize institutional capital at scale? Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm very excited to be here. I'm actually very thankful to the IDB to get us to a place that is warm, because we've been freezing in New York City. What a winter. And I wanted to make that comment because investors are looking at least three things when they think about investing in emerging markets. Policy predictability and having a framework that allows them to invest and keep coming back to those jurisdictions. Standardization, so having contracts that they have reviewed before that allows them to deploy liquidity, but also discipline origination, where they want to make sure that they do deep trade analysis and work with a multilateral to allow for that to be a repeat business in a jurisdiction they know. And alongside the IDB, we've been able to do a lot of these transactions, especially first off in many countries. Thinking about Paraguay, where we are today, alongside the IDB Invest, we were able to finance the first toll road that went into the PPP framework. And that was a collaboration between private sector and the IDB Invest, but also brought alongside us local law firms and offshore law firms. It brought alongside us local banks and financial institutions and consultants and advisors that helped to get that together. So when I think about what investors are looking at, they're looking at origination to share in a way that it's scalable. And when you look at the development of local partners and offshore partners, it really requires all of us working together to structure the things and create a pipeline.
Thanks, Agustina. Thank you, Juan Pablo, for being here. With rising global rates, risk-return calibration more important than ever. How is MetLife Investment Management accessing infrastructural risk in Latin America and the Caribbean? What project characteristics, structuring features, and the signals that you need, again, to scale this confidence and long-term allocations in the region?
Okay, hi everyone, and thanks IDB Invest, Fabio, for the invitation here. Really good friends and partners along the way, Latin America investment infrastructure. And also a bit of a, apologies my voice, I was a bit of a victim from the air conditioning on the airport, but so far so good. So yeah, so I'm going to talk a bit about the perspective from insurance and pension money from developed countries coming into the region. Those are our clients, that's the money we invest. And yeah, you need to imagine for a second an insurance company in the Midwest in the US or a small pension fund was a manager in Germany or Switzerland that are not for profit, that are for profit, not a development bank. And they say, okay, let's do 20-year illiquid transaction in Paraguay or any other country in Latin America. No? So that's the mindset, that's where we're coming from. And I would say, yeah, when we look, and our funds are discretionary, so really we need to make sense for us to participate and our clients to participate. So when we look at the region itself, and also aligned to what you commented in the beginning and other panels before, I would say today there's the bid we have, the demand we had from our accounts is mainly investment grade. Not only because of capital charges, which are really higher compared to IG, but also sometimes because of risk preference, really plain and simple. So with that in mind, and look at the region and say, okay, where I can find opportunities that make sense. It is, I would say, twofold. It's a top-down approach, looking at the countries and the sovereign profile and the ratings they have, because the sovereign ratings basically drive the ratings of the infrastructure deals in most of the countries, because most are really rated to the sovereign. So if the country, and that's one side, and the other side is supply, basically what's available to finance and what makes sense for us to finance. And when you look at the countries, obviously, if you start with IG countries, which are not so many in Latin America, and from then you start to look at the stories that are, improving stories, getting to IG. For example, Paraguay is a great example. Paraguay became the second IG in December. Very good story that showed many of the elements that we like to see. For example, fiscal discipline, growth. I would say a stable social political environment with continuity across governments. So that's a big driver. And again, because if the country goes the other side, you get a downgrade on the country, and it gets a downgrade on the deals we do, and that means more capital charges. So otherwise, the idea is to do the ones that are stable or improving. So that's the idea. That's a big driver, I would say. And then when you go, I would say, deeper into each country and sectors, you need to find the places where you can find transactions and assets that make total sense for the country, that are strategic for the country, that are aligned for the country, because those are the typical assets that the governments are going to protect, even despite political volatility and changing signs for different governments. Ideally, strong sponsors with strong structures, and obviously pricing that makes sense. Construction risk is an element. We do deals with construction risk, but sometimes some investors don't want to run the risk or want to run very well mitigated construction risk. And I would say it's been great to invest in something like a B bond, which we've been very active there with you guys, no doubt. If I got to tell you what's the ideal, a message for you after this conference is bring more IGB bonds with a rating, because the rating, it's important for the regulator as well. So that's a big element. And also we're going to talk more about what we can do with BIG or high yield risk as well. Take later.
Gracias, Juan Pablo. No, it's always a pleasure to work with MetLife in so many projects. Lillian, thank you for being here and getting warmer than in New York, as Agustino was saying before.
I say the same.
Banks are central to syndication and co-investment models that broaden the market depth. From your perspective, what are the key conditions needed to unlock greater cross-border co-investment? And what helps successful deals structures move from one-off transactions to repeatable models across markets?
Yeah, so thank you again for having me here. I think banks are playing a central role, can play a central role in aggregating opportunities, structuring risks, and bringing together different pools of capital. I think when you look into SMBC as an example, a global bank providing expertise that you have from a different region to the region of Latin America helps in also bringing investors that are used to that. So it's taking best practices globally to help standardize the processes and bring investors. So from our perspective, unlocking greater cross-border co-investment basically requires three things. One is what we've been discussing. I think the whole morning was a topic that is the bankable and standardized pipelines. There is a lot of interest in Latin America and more as the world situation keeps changing. But there is a need of visibility on a pipeline of projects with consistent documentation, risk allocation, and governance. When transactions are structured with a repeatable framework, like standardized PPAs or concession models or credit enhancement, investors can deploy capital across multiple markets in a much more efficient way. Secondly is also something we've mentioned, effective risk-sharing mechanisms, and that's why we are all here together. Cross-border investors often face concerns, and sometimes it's the lack of knowledge of how to manage the currency risks, regulatory uncertainties, and political risk. That's where partnerships with institutions like IDB and IDB Invest are so critical. And thirdly, platforms rather than one-offs, as we have been saying, are transactions. The most successful models move from individual transactions to investment platforms. And we've been seeing that in certain sectors, especially new ones, like the data centers, digital, where this has become a reality too. So once investors trust the structure and the governance, the capital can scale much more quickly. So I think how do banks stay central nowadays is by evolving from balance sheet lenders into a more holistic approach to the market, into arrangers, risk managers, and distribution platforms, connecting origination to a broad investor base while keeping the underwriting discipline. It's a changing mindset.
Obrigado, Lilian, from a fellow Brazilian. Patricia, we are so thankful for you being here representing Canada as our strongest sponsor in blended finance. Canada has been a global leader in blended finance, in the forefront of it. What blended structures have proven most catalytic in de-risking emerging market investments, and how can the multilateral developed banks like ourselves and governments reinforce the partnerships with private investors to crowd in the capital, as I said before in my introduction? Thank you again.
Well, good morning. It is a huge honor to be on this panel as the kind of sole government representative. And I think that sends a message around the kind of partnerships that we want to do, and really is a signal of why blended finance has been so important to Canada. I mean, for us, it's a financing mechanism, it's true, but it's also a very strategic tool. The idea is to unlock markets, to correct for failures, and then also to mobilize private capital. And so our question is, what does a government do? Where does it place its support in a world of scarce resources so that our impact is multiplied by bringing in others? So this is what we've been doing. We're very proud of the work that we have done to support the IDB through a variety of Canadian climate funds that are very much geared around the private sector and had a very strong blended finance component to it. So maybe I'll just share kind of two quick examples. First one relating to Uruguay. So over a decade ago, Uruguay began its energy transition. We were there to support, through concessional financing coupled with IDB Invest, a bit of a test, could solar work in Uruguay? And so we financed 3 energy projects, one of which was the first utility scale solar PV plant, a total of 150 megawatts. And then once we'd done it, it seemed so easy. But until you'd done it and you had the demonstration effect, had evidence to share with markets, with potential investors, it was a bit of a proof of concept. And it was around bringing the right technical capabilities, the assistance, the advisory services, so that then afterwards, in fact, we were able to step away, it's commercially viable, and then we remove our concessional money, very much on the point that was raised in the introduction. And then we move it to that next opportunity or new market. The second example, I would say, is one that is more recent. It's around building El Salvador's domestic financial sector. So in this recent project with Banco Agrícola, we have a $10 million contribution, and the idea is to grow the bank's green lending to SMEs. So it has a financial inclusion component, but really it's also about addressing and helping the markets address climate vulnerability and environmental vulnerability. So the idea is that by providing concessional funding, we remove the risks around being a first mover. We can provide the kind of policy support, so to ensure that it's aligned to best practices globally. And then we help the banks to strengthen their own approaches. And of course, our hope is that this will expand the lending through to those that might be less well served in these markets, create a new market segment that is financially viable. And then of course, we would exit, and then banks choose to do so because it's part of their good business and delivers returns for them. So what we've learned through these is that part of the role that we can have is to help address real, but also perceived risks. Sometimes there's just not enough experience or transparency or information for businesses to place their very precious capital and their effort in areas where there isn't a concept. So we have a hunch, we have evidence, and we think that that's the role that governments can play. We also, I think, have a challenge that is still ongoing, and I hope we can come back to it, which is around the long lead times. From the time that we start talking about something, or that a government or a country has something in a plan, to the time where we actually bring a project to market, it's still taking too long. But we're hoping that through our blended financing, we can help to come up with some models that hopefully can be standardized. And we had something during our G7 presidency, an initiative called Scaled, that is really around having a standardized model, common term sheet, things so that you don't have to be reinventing the wheel every time you do consider an investment. And finally, I would say we have learned that we have to be very flexible with our own approach. In order to be really catalytic, we might have an idea, but if there is an opportunity during the discussions, during negotiations, that we have to be flexible to adapt our concessional resources to exactly that place where they're needed at that moment in time. And we're still very much learning, but very committed to remaining in this space around blended finance.
Thanks, Patricia. No, that's, again, the work that IDB Invest in Canada, they have been doing blended finance, and very thankful to the teams. And we are speeding up. No, I think agility is key, and that connection, the daily interaction between the teams and how we deploy that concessional fund is very key and important for many of the projects we see in the region. So I will continue with Canada, but now with Scotia, with Agustina. So again, capital markets, distribution, your experience across different origination pipeline, knowing that what the investors are willing to come again and return and invest repeatedly in emerging markets such as ours. What are your takes on this?
Thank you, Fabio. So if we reflect on what we heard from my colleagues, we realize there is kind of some common themes, right? Predictability is one of them, frameworks and scalability of the projects, and kind of going back to something, proof of concept that we've done already. Speed of execution, Patricia just alluded to it, and I think that by working together, we're achieving that. I think the IDB is one that has been the most flexible in innovating with different structures, whether it's guarantees or AB loans, being an anchor investor on bonds, and across jurisdictions, where there are in the different cycles across the credit space. And the third one we've heard is transparency, around due diligence, around pricing mechanisms, and how we're doing this together. I think investors are also looking for solutions, and Scotiabank is uniquely positioned, given that we have presence in a lot of markets, where systemic bank in many of these markets, including across the Caribbean, and we also have the capacity to provide FX solutions, which have become key to the sustainability of the projects in this environment of kind of high interest rates. So is this partnership and allowing investors to have a clear pipeline, transparency around pricings and due diligence, and trust on the, in the process and their partners that really allows us to deliver projects. And quite frankly, the more deals we do with the IDB and with Canadian investors that we're now mobilizing into the region, as well as with other banks and investors, we already have mechanisms to look at bankability, to discuss pricing tools, and do market sounding ahead of launching a project. And I think investors appreciate that, Fabio, that coming alongside the banks and the multilateral banks early on to give them much more visibility around pipeline and the capacity to deploy.
Thanks, Agustina. And again, I also need to be thankful to our board that they trust on us again for the expanding the debt capital markets program that we have. Again, to be able to attend the markets in those window of opportunities that the emerging markets allow us to anchor and partial care guarantee to get upgrades in terms of the ratings of the issuances. And now we are agile to follow the market and support the market in those capital market issuances. So very thankful as well for the board in these debt capital markets programs that we have seen working and in action in the past years. Back to Juan Pablo, again, insurance companies such as MetLife Investment Management have been predominantly active in investment grade transactions. When you look at what would most enable expanding the investable universe in LAC, particularly in no-investment grade markets. So how you see we doing it, and what you need to see you more in the low scale of the ratings?
If I would say we are just to start, we are active also in BIG. It's not obviously the bulk of it, but we are able to do it. We do it. It's something that goes back and forth depending on the appetite we gather from our clients to invest in BIG. But yeah, it's true, it is mainly investment grade. In fact, I was recalling that I think we probably did after the deals that Agustina mentioned before on the toll roads in Paraguay. They were public deals, which I was also involved for MetLife for the public side before. We did, I think, probably the first private placement here in Paraguay back when it was double-B country with certificates similar to the public deal, but on the private side, a smaller. It was a very interesting deal. Still have it there, and now it's probably becoming investment grade. But yeah, so that's a good point because again, BIG carries higher capital charges. So thinking on ways to get products that allow us to perhaps bring more demand from our clients into the region, into the deals. Because that's another thing I want to highlight. Really, if you are able to go through all the fuss and make the deal work for the investors, the demand you get is huge. The funds are massive, and you get very long tenors, you get a lot of dollars, and you get a very effective pricing, very, very attractive. So once you do go through all that fuss, and you get to a very good result, where possible. And I was thinking, what we can do for the future more to attack those projects in below investment grade countries. I think probably one of the things I was thinking was whether you can do more, for example, partial guarantees from IDB, which has a top rating, that should perhaps bring the deal to IG and allow it to make it more bankable for investors outside the countries. I know sometimes the pricing is tough, but if you can make that work, it's great. And beyond that, we shouldn't forget that, for example, your preferred credit umbrella is also very good because, particularly for those BIG countries or low investment grade countries, when you're going into like 15, 20, 25 years into a transaction that's totally liquid in one of the Latin American countries, having your access to transferability and convertibility, having your access to the political side, it's very important. So that also allows us to even get comfortable within below investment grade. So those are a couple of examples that we see that could work for us.
Gracias, Juan Pablo. Patricia, we keep going back to reforms and regulatory frameworks and what is needed, in terms of multilateral banks, governments, and investors, how we could strengthen global mobilization frameworks, and how can IDB Invest in Canada collaborate to accelerate these approaches for Latin America and the Caribbean to mobilize capital at scale?
So on one hand, we're in a really great space. We've come so far in the last decade. We have some learning. I would start off by saying, it's public financing is not just about mobilizing private capital. You have to actually have some wraparound for that. And so, for instance, in order to have the impact, it means governments working together, regulators, market participants, investors. Like, you have to bring everyone around the table or you're simply not going to get there. And yes, sometimes capital is scarce, but from our experience, it's usually not the hardest thing to bring to the table. Secondly, and here I'm going to repeat a common theme of this panel, but I think it's really important: harmonization and replication. It's great to do something for the first time, but it really matters when you scale it up. So when you take that and you broaden it across markets. And the idea is that it should become part of the standard practice. So for us to make sure that we behave as we should as sovereigns, and when we put conditions, that they're things that are regularly agreed and that we harmonize with others. So that's a job that we have to do amongst ourselves. But then also when we engage with asset managers, with investors, with financial institutions, that the conversation follows something that is not starting from scratch each time. And then finally, when I speak about scale, it's about figuring out how do you do the complementary risk-taking. So where do you situate the risk and what mechanisms do we have? So we're big fans of guarantees. We have quasi-equity tools now within our international development toolkit. Gone are the days where development is about just writing a grant check and then walking away. We want to participate in the market building activities. And so some of the things that we're striving to do with the IDB is really about stretching the balance sheet and welcoming innovation. And that should be hopefully helping to strengthen domestic markets, expand kind of, some reference to bonds before the bond ecosystem, and connect liquidity with infrastructure and climate investment needs. So kind of drawing that kind of, that gap issue. And then what can we do? So we're very enthusiastic about the originate to share model. This is exactly where we think the multilateral development bank system should be going, and that we should be seeing it as the way forward. We have to scale platforms that are repeatable and investor ready. We have to expand the risk-sharing facilities and modalities. And then we have to make sure that all of this is transparent as much as possible so that we share the evidence and that we're really focused on impact. And I think if we do that, there's a huge opportunity that awaits us and we stand ready to participate.
Thanks, Patricia, for the partnership. Lilian, what are the strongest opportunities for co-financing IDB loan structures in the current market? And how can Sumitomo and IDB Invest coordinate to unlock new sectors and geographies?
Yeah, so today the strongest opportunities really fit very well with the region. And it's where there are three things that really intersect. That is a strong underlying demand, bankable cash flows, and a clear need to crowd in long-term capital. So you're talking mostly the infrastructure sectors. That's in Latin America and Caribbean. There is always a lot more that is needed and can be done across the region, as well as in selective financial institutions and corporates in the core emerging markets, so that we keep supporting not only the infrastructure, but areas and pieces of the whole puzzle of development of the region that normally banks do not get, but local ones do. So when investors need, as we mentioned, the comfort of country risk, tenor, or regulatory complexity, the combination of global bank and multilaterals is very powerful. SMBC, for example, has started in the region in Brazil almost 70 years ago. That, there you can see as many situations and movements in a country over that period of time. And that provides some comfort in the way you can, follow an institution like that. So basically, on the infrastructure, we are talking about, renewable energy, transmission, energy transition infrastructure, and digital and logistics infrastructure, as the region benefits from supply chain reconfiguration and nearshoring, the new geopolitical environment, investments in ports, logistics, platforms, data infrastructure, and connectivity is becoming increasingly important. And those require large upfront capital commitments that are very well suited for syndications and co-financing platforms with long-term capital as well. And the lastly is expanding access to financing for corporates and supply chains in general, as I was mentioning. Development institutions help broaden participation from international banks in that sense. So from our perspective at SMBC, the key to unlocking those opportunities is the close coordination with IDB Invest at inception, at origination and structuring stage. When projects are designed, as like one of my colleagues mentioned from the outset, with the co-financing syndication in mind, it becomes much easier to mobilize capital and scale these models across multiple markets. Again, I'll repeat myself, it's a little bit of a change of mindset, but definitely worth it, and I think pretty much aligned over the last, today is my third day here in Paraguay. It is all institutions have been with the same strategy, so very much aligned. It's not all the time that you see different types of institutions looking into the same direction with the same strategy, and that is very powerful. So I think it's actually doing more. SMBC and IDB Invest have been partners for so long, is doing more because strategies are pretty much aligned, and the development of the region is key to the institution.
Thanks, Lilian, Juan, Agustina, Patricia. So for this deep dive in originate to share. So I hope for the audience that you have been able to, again, keep the three pillars here in mind. You know, what we have been talking about, the origination of bankable assets, structuring with investors in mind, and then harmonizing those asset classes that we can connect to the markets. You know, then the second, the instruments. You have heard about many tools in our toolkit box that it's actually connecting those assets with investors across the globe. And then the expansion of investor being from commercial banks to investment banks to regional and global players. We see lots of liquidity, pockets of liquidity in our countries in the region that are now participating in our syndication. So we talked before about having Panamanian banks investing in Paraguay and so forth. So then you sum credit insurers, you have asset managers, you have qualified institutional buyers in international capital markets, and you need instruments to connect those investors that we keep expanding to the assets that we need to develop Latin America and the Caribbean. So I'm very thankful to the panelists for this deep dive. I hope it helped all of you attending to the session to understand what it means originate to share and why it's so important to scale up development in Latin America and the Caribbean. So please join me in congratulating and thanks for the panelists. Thank you.
It was great to hear from this panel. Thank you, Fabio. And thank you all the panelists. As we prepare for our next panel, I would like to remind everyone that the inaugural session of the Board of Governors will take place today at 5 p.m. in this room. The session is open to all participants. You can also follow it live along with all the events through the IDB Group Annual Meetings app or by visiting liveevents.iadb.org. Don't forget to share your pictures of this event on social media using the hashtags Reuniones Grupo BID y IDB Group Meetings. Now, let's welcome Raj Kumar, CEO of DevEx, who will have a conversation with Orlando Ferreira, Managing Director of Finance and Administration of IDB Invest.
Buenas tardes, good afternoon. Good afternoon. You can give him more of a round of applause. Orlando Ferreira. We're gonna title this conversation Orlando Ferreira Sin Filtros, okay? Because this is your last IDB annual meeting, from what I understand.
That's exactly right.
After 25 years, 26 years?
27 by the time I'm done.
Amazing. So look, we're gonna talk in this conversation about the future, of course. I wanna talk about, I think, the big contradiction at the heart of development finance, which is these institutions were set up to go to the hardest places and solve the biggest problems, but they were set up with a culture that often was risk averse because they were government funded and taxpayer money, and they have to be very careful and cautious. And IDB Invest is at an inflection point where it's kind of changing everything. So we're gonna get there.
Yes.
But let's start with your history a little bit, because this is your last annual meeting.
Yes.
Tell people a little bit about this time. You were there as an executive director in 1999 from Paraguay, your home country.
Yes.
And then what happened?
And then the world changed. Our family grew up, our daughters grew up, and we had to make a choice at one point in time and say, where either we go now or we stay. And that's what started the career. My wife and I, had to figure out what was next, and a blink of an eye and we're here.
And that arc of your career over those 25, 26 years at IDB Invest also kind of match the changes that have happened at IDB Invest. What has happened to get to the point we're at now? Describe the evolution.
I think I can title it as being extremely fortunate, because I was able to be there and be present for many transformational changes, but mostly two of them that have happened in less than 10 years. And I was always attracted to the private sector. My background is private sector, even before I went into these rule-based organizations that we call the multilaterals. And I started at one of the three tools that the IDB Group had to work with the private sector, the tiny then Inter-American Investment Corporation. And this was set up as one of the three efforts by the IDB Group to work with the private sector. And these were, in the early 90s, these were the specific tools dedicated to that. Fast forward about a decade, it was evident that there was overlap, that there was a lot more that we could do. And I think the story from then on is really a story of transformation and change. And it's a story of how an MDB can change. And that can be seen as an oxymoron because multilaterals don't change. But our governors, our executive directors, and especially management, realized that something needed to be done, and that there was two avenues that we needed to explore. One, what is it that we could do, and what is it that the group could do as a whole? So I think it's a story of transformation, but also of convergence between what the public sector does and the private sector does.
And maybe a lot of lessons learned too.
Yeah.
Right, about the way multilateral institutions used to think in a very linear direction. They can go to a country and provide a loan and they'll build a road.
Yeah.
But economic development is much more complex than that.
Yes.
And the actual problems are more complex. And you get to a point like now where James is on stage saying $3.5 billion recapitalization and taking more risk. It doesn't happen overnight. There's been a history that got us there.
So, given the time that we have, I'll try to make it very short. So, what happened at some point is that the mandates of these three tools, or windows as we call them, started to overlap. But more importantly than that is there was no real cohesive way to look at the private sector, no coordination, no cohesive strategy. And that motivated a discussion of whether we should create a tool within the bank or we should do it outside. The decision was to do what we called a merge out, so put all these three windows that were working on the private sector into the existing Inter-American Investment Corporation. But the important part about that change was really threefold. One is the belief that managing private sector risk required a private sector culture. And that then derived into, okay, what are the type of resources that you need to actually make an impact in the private sector? And the third is, how can we work as a group to get us there? And I think those are the things that actually ended up happening. Our shareholders, the 48 countries, provided $2 billion of capital. We were able to create this new organization, which is now IDB Invest. But I think what sometimes gets lost in the narrative is that it took a lot of effort to put together this organization and create one out of three. Anybody who has gone through this process can understand that. But the important part was also, for example, making the country managers, the country representatives as group representatives. So starting this road where people in the field should think public and private. We got to a better place recently. But also in the beginning, we shared the balance sheet of IDB as it was growing, IIC as it was growing, or now IDB Invest, with the balance sheet of the bank. to be able to get us to the point where we could sort of take off. And the numbers don't tell the whole story, but when you think about that the three windows before, we're doing about $2 billion maximum together, and the reforms and all of these elements got us to about $9.5 to $10 billion of activity in the region, really showed that the coordination, the strategy, the working as a group all paid off and got us to a point where we could be a lot more systemically important within the Latin American and the Caribbean region. So that was the first big transformation. That's something that happened between 2012 and 2015, and it started operations in 2016.
And let's talk about the more recent experience now. What is different about IDB Invest today over that last decade that it's grown since then?
A lot. So then the second great transformation started in 2023. Our shareholders looked at what happened. They said this was a success. The experiment worked. So what do we do next? And then it took the creativity and the effort of a lot of people around the organization, the senior management team. I see some of my colleagues there who were directly participants and the brains behind what happened. Because it wasn't just about doing what we were doing before. It was really a rethinking of what should be the risk appetite of an MDB. And it ended in what you said at the beginning, is how can we crowd in private sector to the region. Fabio was reminding us in the previous panel that out of the $13 billion that were deployed last year, 7.7 billion came from external partners. And that was at the core of the model. But to do that, we had to apply the capital differently. And the short version of that is what we ended up defining as the 5 levers of the new business plan. And it came about through consultations with the market, saying if we were to crowd you in, if we were to bring you in, what do we need to do? And the answer, sort of the simplified answer, was you need to be a lot more present in the equity markets. We are expecting to triple our equity volume between now and 2030, which is what we call at peak day. We are set to double our capacity to incorporate riskier assets so we can also work in more countries in the region more actively. We are set to double our participation in local currency markets, and our ambition is to have local currency solutions in all 26 markets at some point. And we're creating a technical cooperation facility out of our net income to work upstream and help clients get ready. But the most important piece is what we are generally calling risk transfers, and it gets translated into the originate to share model, where we are able to absorb, in some cases, a bigger portion of the risk so we can crowd in private sector investors. So that's what's at the core on the IDB Invest side. But if you allow me one more minute, there's a big piece also on the IDB side, and now IDB Group, because there's an effort that was made by the IDB Group to also get to this message that we're hearing today from President Ilan Golfan, that we want to be the private sector institution, that we want to create the conditions as a group for private sector-led development. And you heard from our CEO, James Scriven, this morning about our ambition. And that is linked to the fact that we now have a regions department where we have our ear to the ground on what the countries want. We have a products department that is led by Fabio. Katia is a regions manager who came before in the previous panel. All of those are dedicated for us to be a lot more closer to the ground. And there's a lot stronger relationship now between the country offices and Katia as the manager for regions, and finding all of these links. As I said in the beginning, how can we get the public and the private sector to converge to create the conditions for private sector development?
If another leader of a development finance institution is listening to this and thinking, how do we do this at our institution? You found a way, you said at the very beginning, to create a culture that was a private sector culture inside a multilateral institution. And then you use that culture to do things private companies do. Survey the market, talk to your customers, right? Ask them what their needs are. What have you really done here? Why have you been able to do this in a way that many other development finance institutions find it very hard to do?
I think it's a combination of many things, but the Minister of Finance of Paraguay and our governor at the bank reminded us on his introduction that survival is not a question of growth, it's a question of adaptation. And I think that's the key, and I think that's the main message. It's an institution that was always willing to change and always willing to transform. Of course, that is a function of leadership. It's a function of having people that are dedicated, that are willing to undergo and support the change. So it's every single person along that came with us along for the ride. And obviously, in this later iteration, the leadership of James and the senior management team, I see Rosemary and Rachel and Fabio, and I think Sergio and Katia are at a signing right now. Sofia also there, and Marina, who leads the planning and strategy area. So it takes a lot of people to do this, and but I think that's the key. If a multilateral like us can change, I think anybody can change, and I think that's the key. Obviously leadership, but this willingness to change, this willingness to abandon what works, because the model was working.
In a sense, it was working.
In a sense, it was working.
It wasn't solving the real problems on the ground.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
You know, my version of the Winston Churchill quote would be, the global development community always embraces the private sector after it's exhausted all the other options. And it's taken a long time for many institutions to get to the point where they're doing what you're doing, really talking to the private sector, say, what is it you need? How do we find a way to work together within your remit, within your requirements, your environmental, your social, your governance, your other factors? What are the biggest risks to this failing, this big trajectory? You have the money, it sounds like. You got the recapitalization. What could make this fail?
I think we have to finish getting the organization ready for the change. I think we do have some time to do that, because we have to get the people in, we have to grow. We have a plan to grow the organization by about 40%. We have a plan to change our technology base. We have a plan to change our risk appetite policies. We have a plan to put in place the structure, the framework. So that's part of it. But I think the main challenge will be to sustain the culture, to make sure that it actually grows, that we become even more ambitious in the future. What our CEO outlined today with that big number of 200 billion in the next 10 years, that is very ambitious. But I wrote to him later, I think to the team, said, well, the best you can do is manifest your destiny. So I think that's what we need to do from now on.
Yeah, we heard from one of the mining executives on the panel earlier. He said, the finances is a part of the problem. We need the money.
Yeah.
But we also are being asked to build a mining operation, that's going to house 10,000 workers and a couple thousand permanent workers at 4,000 meters of elevation, many miles away from the ports and the cities. And it's not an insignificant, it's not a trivial thing to do that construction, that effort. And similarly, for a multilateral institution, it's not trivial to take a strategy and take the finance from your shareholders and actually turn it into something operational in the way you're trying to do.
Absolutely. But I think what we got going for us is the knowledge that we've done it once. what happened between 2012 and 2015, and then starting in 2016, didn't happen by accident. And having done that, I think gives us the hope or the courage or the knowledge even that we can do it again. And I think 2025, even though it's a prior year, the capital will come in the future. I think it shows that confidence, that trust in each other can really help us to fulfill that level of ambition. At the end of the day, institutions are people. We tend to think of, especially multilaterals, are these aloof, either I know what they are or I don't know what they are. If I don't know, maybe I'm afraid to even talk to them. But at the end of the day, what we have been trying to do, I think it's get very, very close to the ground, demystify that air, and make sure that at the end of the day, people see people, and people who are there to help, people who have the expertise, who have the knowledge, who have the willingness, who have who are willing to make any effort to make sure that we achieve our development mandate. Because at the end of the day, that's what we're here for, and we don't forget that.
Well, listen, this is your last annual meeting. How does that feel? It must be a little surreal, I would think.
I think it's surreal because it was here. And if you allow me to break protocol for a little bit.
Of course.
Lo que me enorgullece.
What gives me more pride than anything else is that it's an opportunity to be involved in change, which is not something one has often, but as James was saying in a previous panel, you need to go out and find them. And to my compatriots that are still in the audience, there might be some left, I'll remind you that there are 155 Paraguayans like yourselves, like me, that are working every day in the IDB group, that are actively working on this change and on this task. If I could make a wish, it would be 1,550, but one can only wish. And the Paraguayans at the IDB are a very important part of the success of this country.
Sure. I'm not worried. I'm just one of them leaving. There's 154 who will stay, and hopefully there will be 154 more as we grow. So there's a good thing about planned obsolescence, which comes with mandatory retirement. So you can, when you can plan it, then it doesn't hurt that much.
Well, next year when we at DevEx are covering the annual meetings and many of your colleagues are there working and you're watching it with a glass of wine in your hand virtually, we will be thinking of your important words today. Please join me in thanking Orlando Ferreira for everything.
Thank you, Orlando, for those closing remarks, and the wonderful audience for joining us these days to the forum and the seminars. It was truly a pleasure to moderate these sessions. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you and goodbye.
Join us in Paraguay on March 11 to 14 for our most important gathering, the IDB Group's annual meeting. Last year was the IDB Group's record year, with the highest ever level of $35 billion in financing, while strengthening the quality of our projects and processes, and therefore delivering impact. This led us to a year of record recognition, including Multilateral Development Bank of the Year. Now, we need to build on that. The IDB Group will focus on growth, has foundation for development, including private sector network, critical minerals, supply chains, supporting countries in economic transition, and advancing integration among those ready